Hello.
Hi. Thanks for doing this.
How's it going? Yeah, no
Good.
worries.
We want to mention that you are now also, in addition to an ex-basketball player, a podcaster. Remind people before we get into anything, what's the name of the podcast?
It's Rogue Bogues. So just a little play on nickname, everything like that. So at Rogue Bogues on all social media platforms and at Rogue Bogues on all kind of podcast platforms. And we do a mix of things. We do a weekly basketball show with Mike Procopio, who was a long time NBA coach, NBA workout guy, NBA scout. Do that weekly. And it's just kind of really raw. That was the whole point of it. We wanted to be raw. There's a little bit of swearing in there, which we get a little bit of crap for. But we wanted to keep it real and not the fluff that, as you know, you were involved in pro sports that we see a lot. And then I also do a My Journey series, which is just myself, basically from start to finish my career is how it's going to play. Basically an autobiography via podcast. I think it's the first of its kind for a athlete to do. So I want to do that before a book. And then I also do a car chat series, which is only monthly with a good friend of mine, just talking about, muscle cars and classic cars, which is kind of a passion of mine. And it's been fun to get on there and just pen my thoughts, verbally, essentially.
Before we get into why we're here, which is to talk a lot about the habits and routines that you've built over the years that I would imagine you're using even in post-basketball days, I want to ask you three really important questions. First one is, would you rather die by drowning or in a fire?
Oh, I had a discussion with my wife. I think the drowning would be a quicker death. So I'll take that one.
Probably not quite as uncomfortable because apparently you just sort of get a little soporific and then go out.
Yeah, I'll take the drowning.
Okay. So speaking of water, swimming or running?
At this point in my life, swimming.
I wondered. We are not going to do this, but you and I could probably compare orthopedic injuries, and us large humans, we're not really built that well for running, as it turns out.
That'd be a long conversation if we did, but yeah, towards the end of my career, much harder to run, as people would have noticed, got much slower. But yeah, now as far as heart rate stuff, I try to do as much non-impact as I can to stay in shape.
Okay, last question. How do you take your coffee?
I mix it up, but generally I like a little bit of milk, so kind of a short latte in Australia. They call them piccolos, actually. So it's basically, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but it's a shot of espresso, and then it's just a small latte, essentially, like a mini latte. So it's not a big cup, but like a smaller cup. And but I can do straight espresso. I can do macchiatos, I can do lattes, and kind of do anything. And then during the day, where I'm at right now, the climate's pretty warm. So my second coffee, I have two coffees a day, one in the morning, one after lunch, and the one after lunch usually is an iced coffee just because it's pretty warm here.
Did you drink coffee during your career?
I did, yes.
Okay. I only discovered it after I was done playing, and I'm kind of confused as to what I was doing with my life. So you have more culture.
Well, you are American.
So I know. That's
the American coffee. Yeah, it's getting there. You guys are getting there a little bit, but you're about 6 steps behind Europe and Australia.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into some basketball talk. I want to know, when did basketball click for you? Like, when was it that you felt like, I'm better at this than many people are at other things?
Probably pretty late in my what would be American high school. Our system's a little bit different here. We don't play in high school. We play for a club outside the school.
Right.
But I was kind of bounced around, cut, not really wanted. 11, 12, 13, 14. And then 15 really put the effort in, the time and effort, started to do a lot more away from team settings and just figuring all that out. And then when I knew I had a chance to be a professional was at about 16, 17. Signed a letter intent to go to University of Utah. So I kind of knew, like, at minimum, I'm playing in Australia or a low level Europe, mid level Europe. And then for me, it all came together within 18 months, 2 years. I went from being relatively unknown in 2003, going to a World Junior Championships, MVP All-Star 5, winning a gold medal for Australia, which was first of its kind, 2003 August to 2005 NBA draft. So it went like really quick. It wasn't I wasn't one of these kids that was highly touted. I wasn't well known, and it just all came together. You know, it was almost so fast you didn't even have time to enjoy it because you were just going from one thing to the other.
Mm-hmm. What I'm going to dive in a little bit to feelings here. I think a lot about how valuable it is when you find a state of flow or where you're truly connected and you feel just different and almost superhuman. Do you remember that occurring to you, or that sense of feeling different on the court or working out on your own at a certain age?
Yeah, no. I mean, when it came as a young fella, you don't really even think about that. For me, like that state of flow, I thought about it more towards the end of my career when the game becomes much more mental. Probably overanalyze things and overthink things. As a young fella, you just go out there and play. You don't think about anything else. So the best state of flow to me is that one where you're not thinking about state of flow. Does that make sense? Where you're not thinking about the mental side of the game. It's just natural. You go out there, you play hard, you try to win, and try to play well. And that was, for me, that was, college, definitely my sophomore year, my second year, and then probably the first 5 years, 6 years in the NBA, I was in that state. Once injuries started and different things started occurring in my life on and off the court, that's when it became a bit more of a grind to get to that mental state.
You mentioned that there was a point where you started working more on your own. What was it that tipped you over? Like, was there I went through many things in my career of either people saying I couldn't do it or potentially being pulled by the positive and loving the feeling of being on the court. Do you remember a sense of like, I am now motivated to go do this on my own, and when that would have happened?
Well, I think I was always motivated. I love the game so much from a really young age. I fell in love with the game at, I think 8 or 9 years old. And but you don't know the avenue or the forums or the route you need to take to be really good. But it was a matter of, there was someone that invited me to a basketball game or a basketball training session, I'd go no matter what. At all costs, I'd try to get to it because I just loved playing. It wasn't about who it was with or if it was a big name coach or whatever. I just loved being around the game. So once I started to figure that out, I played for as many teams as I could. At times I was playing 5 games a weekend, 6 games a weekend. Then on top of that, you got the training sessions for those teams, but it still wasn't enough. So I think it was at under 18 level. I was about 16, 17. I tried out for our state team, which is, similar to AAU in the US, or let's say our big championships, the state championships. So you represent your state at a junior level, under 16s, under 18s, under 20s, and you represent your state and go and play against other states. And that's kind of where all the college scouts come and all that kind of stuff. So going to that was important. I didn't make that team. I under 18s. I got selected as an emergency. So that meant that if someone got injured, I'd get to go. So I didn't really get to go, and no one's going to get injured. Everyone's going to try to play no matter what. And I remember my father, we had a game one day, and there was my father's Croatia, whole family's from Croatia, and there was a guy from the Balkans, half Croatian, half Serbian, who happened to be at one of my junior games, and he sat next to my dad and said, is that your son right there? I was lanky, skinny, wasn't growing into my body. And he said, I can make that guy a professional. My dad's like, okay, well, and we paid numerous individual coaches along the journey, and some of them were flaky, some of them just did it for money. Not a whole lot eventuated out of it. My dad said, well, put your money where your mouth is. And he's like, oh, I don't have time. I don't have time. So my dad's like, well, then, shut up. Like, what are you talking to me for? Leave me alone. And I guess they exchanged numbers. There was a bond there because of, the guy was half Croatian, half Serbian. And then that night we got a phone call from him, basically telling my father, you're on. I'll say, start training your son. And it was relentless. So on top of all my club training, this dude would wait for me after school, school gate, in his beat up car, and I'd jump in his car, go home, get changed, and go find a gym that was available straight after school and just work. And a lot of times we wouldn't, it wouldn't be a 4 or 6 session or a 4 or 7. It'd be 4 until we got to self-support, which I hated. So some days I'll be praying like, I hope someone's booked the court out for indoor soccer or badminton or basketball, whatever. And that was Monday to Friday, and then on top of that, I had all the other commitments to school. So that's when my workload went from like wanting to be great to really wanting to be great. And I just noticed my like I said, my I was just going like this at that point when other kids were kind of taking it step by step. I was just jumping them all. Every month I was just passing them by, and that's what it really felt to me.
What was it about that coach's methodology that clicked? Because we all had so many zillions of different coaches, and I can remember in my own past that there were certain people that it could have been the timing was right, it could have been that personality. What do you think it was about that particular person that helped?
I was a mix of things. First off, my father had to pay someone to do it, so it was very, very pricey. We're a working class family, and my dad was paying a fair bit of money this guy daily to train me, and so his attention was just getting me better. There was no politics involved. He was paid for a service, and he wasn't a club coach that was friends with parents and I like his kids because I know his sister or whatever it was. There was none of that stuff. That was number one. It was someone that gave me the attention and time and effort that I was in return for the love I had for the game. I finally had someone that was developed, and there was obviously the Balkan connection, similar ideals, and I think just some days he knew when to beat me down, and some days he knew when to pick me up, and it was just a matter of, I think, even the placebo effect of putting in more time than other people, even sometimes if it isn't that beneficial of what you're actually doing, I strongly believe that the mental side of I've done more work than you plays a big part in your mind. And obviously the work and the skill development is a big part as well. But I later on in my career, I started to realize that if I'm putting in 10 hours and you're putting in 2 hours, I know eventually that we're going to meet on that curve and I'm going to pass you. And even just from a mental standpoint, it gets better. So that's exactly what it was.
Let me tell you that this may seem like a strange question, but do you have brothers and sisters?
I have an older sister, yeah.
Okay. Because one of the things I noticed about coaching, there was something really interesting about or special about that one-on-one relationship that gets built. I have 3 younger brothers. And so there was something also very cool about, like, I'm getting this outside influence where this person cares specifically about me on my own. Did you ever get a sense of that? Like, that there's something about when it's not a parent as well that helps?
Of course, yeah. And that's where it's hard in team sports. A team coach is kind of a tough position because he has 10, 12 players that he needs to take care of. And like I said, politics can play a part. Favorites, human nature, it's just the way life is, right? But yeah, like I said, it was finally someone that attended to my needs, addressed my weaknesses, addressed my strengths, and was point blank with it. There was no need to be politically correct. There was no need to tell you kind of a nice way of that you suck at this. It was like, you suck at this. You need to get better at this, and we're gonna work on this daily. I think that's the realization that you can spend a day or two having those conversations, whether you like hearing them or not. But then it's like, okay, now the flip side, this is our plan of getting that better, and that's what really was important for me. Even though at times you don't want to hear it as a young kid, you're like, I thought I was great, but, well, no, you can't go left, or no, your defenders are going by you and your closeouts need to adjust, whatever it was. And we used to just address a bunch of different things. And on top of that, it was about developing into my body. Like, I was lanky, skinny, at times uncoordinated. Like, I was growing so fast that I'd build up my mobility and my footwork would get to a great level. And then I'd grow 2 or 3 inches and it'd be like, it all just fall apart for a couple of months and then I have to get it back. So I was just doing all that stuff daily really, really helped.
When you got to the US, did you have, or I'm sure from what I know of you online, you have opinions about many things, as do I. There must have been things that struck you about the American developmental system. Part of the reason I asked this is because when I played in Europe for a while, I noticed that there was so much difference between the way that European training happened and American training happened. So was there a sense of, I wish I had X, or was there a sense of, wow, I got a better education than many of these Americans, or some combination thereof?
Well, a combination of both. Because Americans got the best athletes and athletic perspective of basketball in the world. Something that's very hard to teach. I think the rest of the world caught up with probably surpassing America with skill development and technique because they had to. That was their only way to try and compete. If they try to go on athlete versus athlete, most countries have no chance in the USA. So the one thing I wanted to get over to the States was like I knew like I had a well had run dry for me here competition wise. Towards the end of my era here as a junior, I was the best player. So I thought I need to go get my ass kicked by someone else. Like I don't want to be that guy kicking someone else's ass because that's what worked for me as a junior, young age. I was always middle of the bottom, aiming up to kick that guy's ass, right? So I was now that guy at the top, and I was like, I'm not going to get better having these guys trying to get to where I am. So I need someone above me. So that was a big positive for me going to the US was I need to get my ass kicked. But I went to the Australian Institute of Sport, the AIS. So those that aren't familiar, they can Google it. It's in Canberra. It's basically a national sporting body that was identified in the 80s. Australia had a horror run at the Olympics. The government said, we need to fix this. And they gave scholarships out from numerous different sports. You moved there full time at 15, 16, 17, you trained, and basketball had a program. And they taught us basically everything from, showing up on time, booking medical appointments, getting your physio in, getting your massaging, self-stretching, self-massage. As crazy as it is, we used to have team massage sessions where we'd have one masseuse that would walk around, 12 of us in the team. We'd partner up with a teammate, and then the teammate would have to massage whatever I wanted to massage. Like I could tight calves in my calves, and then we'd switch 30 minutes. So even just stupid stuff like that at the time you thought was just crazy, like I'm rubbing oil on a teammate. But it taught you how to, like if you do end up in Europe in a small league with, no budget for physio, you can get by and learn. And that's where I was way ahead of any other kid in college. Hot, cold tubs, all that kind of stuff. No one was doing that when I got to the US. It was some NBA teams didn't even have cold tubs at that point. It was bonkers, right? So that's where I was really far ahead. And I think the Australian system and even the European to an extent is ahead as far as development. But the talent is obviously a whole different story when it comes to athleticism.
Yeah, I certainly noticed that when I was in Europe. There was an element of equipping the players to be resilient regardless of the surroundings. And I do wonder, like in the US, there's a little bit of I don't know how to put this, but there's a selfishism of like, when you're in our college, we'll take care of you, but we don't want you. We're not really necessarily thinking of how this is going to go beyond that, which looking back is really frustrating.
On top of that, you got AAU programs too. So
right, yeah.
That's a whole nother debate. You got coaches taking money from Nike out of that. Whatever's going on, there's so much intertwined, and it all comes down to money, right? So getting down. But we don't really have that extent in Australia, and I hope we don't get to that point. Our junior development is up there with some of the best in the world. A big problem for Australia for a number of years was our juniors would win gold or bronze medals at junior tournaments, and there'd be a massive drop off after that. They wouldn't equate into being good seniors or good. For our men's program, the Australian Boomers, it just never equated, right? So now we're starting to see it's starting to trickle over. Myself, Paddy Mills, Salvador, Joe Ingles, Aaron Baines, Ben Simmons, So we're all of a sudden starting to fill that gap, and that's a testament to our junior development. I think our junior development is very, very good here.
When it comes to the post basketball days, what have you taken from sports that you now use in the rest of your life, whether consciously or unconsciously? Because I think sometimes that stuff just kind of seeps in. You mentioned being taught to show up on time, right? So I've noticed about athletes that they're so much like military people in that you can always count on them to show up. Whereas it turns out that a lot of the rest of the world isn't necessarily like that. So have there been things that you've noticed where you're like, oh, wow, that's probably because of sports that I behave this way?
Oh, scheduling for me is very, very important. And that's in sports. It's having a daily schedule, having things planned out. I still get frustrated with my wife sometimes if we get caught in the crosshairs schedule-wise, or she scheduled something that was already, or vice versa, right? And then it ends up a little bit awkward and get into it a little bit. But that's just because unfortunately, as an athlete, you have to be selfish. It's my physio, my recovery, my training session, to my pre-game meal has to be at this time. It has to be this food, to my coffee at this time. And, that's why I kind of set the conversation, but that's why I kind of plan on having kids later in life, because I knew that, it was somewhat all about me, and I had to be practice to be successful. And yeah, I definitely agree that was one thing that I learned, was just being on time and being respectful of people. And just, I think for me, it was, one thing I picked up from pro sports was just treating everyone, with respect, whether it was people that cleaners at the facilities or just saying hello to people. That was something that always kind of bugged me about professional players, was they generally, most, not all, but most, the majority, would take those people for granted, whereas I kind of understood those people more because I was from that kind of family where we were those people. So that's where I really try to make an effort to interact with just everyday people that probably wouldn't get a hello from the player.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's amazing about that, I find, is that buys you time and grace if something goes wrong. Like if you treat the equipment manager or the trainer or whomever else well, and it's between you and one other guy that may be just as good as you, then they're going to pick you because they're like, that guy's just easy to be around. And I think people forget how important that is, not only in sports, but just like in the world. Like if you're easy to be around, people will just give you opportunities constantly, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, that wasn't why I was doing it. It was more just my soul, my point of view. It's just like I had some teammates that would just treat, whatever, air hostess, the flight attendants, stewards, or whatever the politically correct word is you have to use these days. But I would treat them like shit, and it would just bother me. Like I was just like, dude, like they're trying their best. There's 12 hungry players. Like you can wait an extra 5 minutes for your meal. Like so stuff like that kind of bothered me. When it probably shouldn't have. We go back to that flow state of trying to not have things bother you that shouldn't. But as far as a human being and just an everyday person, that was something I struggled with.
Mm-hmm. Did you struggle with the end of basketball, or were you ready for it to be over?
Oh, I definitely struggled. Like still, I think going from Milwaukee to Golden State was a transition. Went from number one, number two options for 5 or 6 years. Everything was kind of built around my skill set to then being a fourth, fifth option on a great team. But I adapted to that pretty well because we're winning. If we weren't winning and I was asked to do that, probably would have been a different story, different situation, or a conversation we had with the GM, like, get me out of here. But the fact that we were winning, I was happy in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
What really hit me was getting to Dallas, and then we started, I don't know, 2-8, 2-7, 2-9, whatever we were, and it was like, okay, we're gonna play you off the bench. And I'd never come off the bench in my career, and that's when the realization set in. Like, I was pissed about it for a week or two. I was bitter about it, didn't handle it the best way I could have. But then after that came the realization, 32 years old, a lot of injuries, slowing down. It is what it is. I need to kind of adapt to this, and that's where it's hard. And no one can prepare you for that. Your agent, your family, your parents, your coach, whoever it is, to not prepare you for those different journeys. And it's a roller coaster of the ride, and you kind of have to adapt the right way. And no one handles it the right way. No one handles it the wrong way. Everyone handles it with, whatever they've had in their upbringing. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me. And then just recently with COVID hitting after the NBL season, I played 2019, 2020, with the plan to get to the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. That was kind of my short, medium, long-term plan, retire after that. And then shit at the fan with COVID. So our season finishes in March. I'm like, okay, I'm going to face myself here. I'm going to work out to the Olympics, and then that gets cancelled. And I was at knife's edge on that final season in the NBL anyway, body-wise. Like, I was severely breaking down, struggling to get out of bed some days, and not being able to play with the kids. So then that got cancelled, and I'm like, I don't have another year in me to play professionally to stay in shape for the Olympics in 21. So it was somewhat it wasn't a forced retirement, but I just knew mentally I couldn't get through another year, and unfortunately I couldn't hold on for what would have been my fourth Olympics.
Mm-hmm. Do you now sometimes enjoy not being in pain? Because that's one thing that I sort of forget to remind myself about. Like you, my body started to fall apart when I was about 32, 33. And it was just every day was waking up thinking, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get out of bed today. And now I feel so much better. And it's wonderful to be 43 years old and feel way better than I did when I was 30 years old. So has that already happened to you, that you feel enough better that you're able to recognize that?
Yeah, it has. But look, to be honest, I still need to work out, because if I don't, I mean, my body gets even worse. So
right.
try to work out 3 or 4 times a week. So not nothing crazy before work. I had back issues throughout my career. So I started to do stuff, but when the realization for me hit, like I said, that last season in the NBL, I was putting in so much more time than I was getting out of basketball, and it was getting there 2-3 hours before, rubbing the heat creams on, stretching, getting 30 minutes of physio, and then having to warm up, and then you see the young fellas just roll out of their car and they're ready to go, and that was hard. But the realization for me was going to the park with my kids who were only 2 or 3 years old at that time, and like not being able to push the swing properly because my back was bad, or being cognizant of like, I can't be doing too much of this because I might tweak something, need to go home and rest. And that was like, at this point, 15, 16 years pro, like I'm losing too much for the game. So that was a big part of my decision as well, and decided to wrap it up.
If you were telling someone who had a 13-year-old, let's say, one thing to teach them when it comes to maybe basketball, but just sports in general, what would that thing be?
One thing, tough one. Basketball related, just sport related, is just the journey of winning and losing. I think it's underappreciated. I think we try to coddle our kids. It's well publicised. They do it in Australia. There's a lot of leagues and junior leagues that don't keep score. Under 12, under 14 level, they don't keep score. No one wins or loses. Like, that's the truth. The kids know who wins or loses at the end of the night, generally anyway. And we're coddling kids into that and not realising the positives of both. The positives of winning, winning gracefully, being a good sport, like you win by 40, you're not laughing in your opponent's face in the game. Knowing that, okay, last week we lost, but this week we won because we put in a bit more work. All those kind of nuances that you get through, and then losing the same, like learning how to lose, learning how to look an opponent in the eye and saying, okay, you marked this week, but now I've got another week to prepare and try to beat you the next week. And they're the important journey. It's not so much about the win or loss, what's in between. And I think with the way we're bubble wrapped in society, there's just no resiliency anymore with a lot of kids, and it's not their fault. It's not the kids' fault. Parents and society's fault. For at times the kids have to and cry and fall off the monkey bars or whatever it is, right? There's no other way of learning. You can't be there for every minute of their life to try and tell them, oh, it's the monkey bar's fault. You fell off the monkey bars, So I think that's where we're at, and that's the biggest thing I talk to kids about at a young age is embracing the winning and losing.
Yeah, it's such a paradox because we think that we're doing someone a favor by protecting them, but in reality, you're setting them up for long-term failure because they don't have that feedback, right? So like that's one thing that I think is so valuable about sports is not only the wins and losses that are the game, but the wins and losses that happen within the game. So like getting your ass handed to you on some play and then realizing like, oh, I have to recover so quickly because the next play is already starting. And I think that has trained my brain in an interesting way where it's always kind of recovering. There's a deep disappointment of like, that went badly and now I feel like shit, but then having to force yourself to get back up for the next play it's just like invaluable as far as just getting through life, I think.
Well, no doubt. We just continue to either get embarrassed or continue to lose or continue to not do well. Where it's a business investment. If you're investing the same kind of way and you're losing money, it's the same thing. Or you need to figure out, do some extra research, do some extra reading, talk to people to know why is this happening. If you just keep doing the same thing, you're eventually going to be broke. So it correlates to, thousands of different industries, and that's the beauty of doing sport. Why I try to influence, recommend all kids play in the sport, even if you know you're not going to be professional, because it teaches you these things at an early age that can transition into so many different things.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that gets lost here in the US. I can't speak to what it's like in Australia, but there is this sense that like the only reason you're playing on the travel team or whatever else is to get a college scholarship or to play professionally, which is so short-sighted because the sport has inherent value whether you're successful at it or not, and that's peculiar to me.
Yeah, 100%. And look, just going back to the adversity thing, spoke about it on my podcast, funnily enough, last week. There's 1,900 kids that have put in transfer requests out of 4,500 D1 basketball athlete.
Wow.
So that goes into what I'm saying. Look at the NBA teams as well, like superstars joining other superstars. There's much more movement now because, players, they rightfully can move, but players are like, oh, I don't like this, I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's what I go back to my point about, building that resiliency and having adversity at a young age and parents be coddling. I mean, 1900 out of 4500 is insane.
Mm-hmm.
One out, it's a third almost, it's over a third. That's just an insane number that kind of, backs up what we're talking about.
For those who are not familiar, what Andrew is talking about is in the NCAA, they've made it allowable to sort of enter this transfer portal so that you can leave one college, go to the other without the penalties that maybe would have existed in the quote olden days, which on one hand is actually somewhat good because it gives agency to the players, but on the other hand, it usually isn't the best mark of resilience, as you mentioned.
Like 1/10. I think a good number for transfer portal to me is 1/10. Like you might get a kid that the school coach gets fired, I signed him because of you, or a kid goes to a school where the coach is just an arsehole to him, and he's just being berated mentally and wants to leave. That's about a 1 out of 10. There's maybe one guy on every roster. There's not 1900 out of 4500. That's where that's one completely the other way.
Yeah, it's wild. We're going to descend into just being two old men here shortly. Okay. I want to take one question that I'm just going to ask you, and then we're going to promote somebody and have them ask us a question to our faces. Okay. So Ken wondered, you had a brutal injury to your arm early in your career. What lesson did you learn from that about how to overcome setbacks?
Well, that was a game changer for me. So that was my best season in the NBA was that year. So I get drafted number one, slowly getting better every year. Finally got into that star kind of status. Made all NBA 13 that year, and felt like everything was coming together. And then bang, shooting arm basically. Almost would have been better decapitating that arm, to be honest, because I broke my elbow, fully hyperextended my elbow, broke my wrist, 2 bones, kind of down to my wrist, broke my index finger. So it was like it wasn't just my elbow, and then recovering from that was just pain. It was painful rehab number one because you literally have to have physio trying to crank out extension and flexion. So basically, that's me biting a towel and a physio kind of straighten your arm every day.
Mm-hmm.
And then factor all that in, you got to figure out how to shoot basketball again. So it completely changed the way I shot the ball. It hindered a lot of my offensive game, and it's not an excuse. It is what it is. Thankfully, I was pretty good with my left hand as well. And yeah, it messed with my confidence, and it took some time to get back. The way I treated all injuries in the NBA and all rehab, all major injuries anyway, was, all right, doc, what's the rehab time? They told me for that. Could be up to a year, 9 to 12 months. All right, I'm going to beat that. That was kind of the way I kind of addressed it because I had no choice. I wanted to kind of go to the next thing about being competitive and trying to beat something, and that was all I could see. I knew I wasn't going to be playing 5-on-5 or 1-on-1 for a while, so I stupidly beat that rehab by way too much. Like I was back on the court training camp. I did it in March, and I was back on the court in training camp, which was late September, and I came back way too early and still couldn't extend my arm to shoot a basketball, but grinded it out and still played an okay. I mean, I averaged a double-double somehow that season, but was not playing at the level I was before, and it was hard to take, but it was just something that I had to kind of battle through.
Mm-hmm. That's, I think, noble that you always assumed you could do it faster. My take as mostly a mercenary was always like, whatever they say, I need to add like 6 months to it because I'm not sure they have my best interest in mind. Because like when I was in Russia or something, and they'd be like, yeah, you'll be back in 3 months. And you're like, I don't believe you. You're just saying that because you work for the team.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And that's a hard one. I would always get a second opinion. I learned that pretty quickly in the NBA. I got misdiagnosed early on with back spasms that ended up being stress fractures.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, not recommended, and kept playing on stress fractures, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
Finally found it. And that was because I got a second, third opinion outside of the team. So it can happen, and it does suck. But it was more from a personal point of view. So if the team doc said 12 months, I'd still get my second opinion, third opinion from people I trusted back in Australia generally. They'd give me the same answer, and then I'd I've seen a lot of trainers, try to wheel guys out in a wheelchair sometimes. They're, you're all right to play, you'll be fine. You're like, my leg's broken. No, just warm up and see how you feel. Like, no.
Yeah, that's my favorite was always, well, it's good news. They just said it's a matter of how much pain can you deal with. And so they just put it on you like, well, I guess I'm a sissy because this hurts a lot. So I feel like I should stop.
You played in Russia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Anthony told me the story. Wasn't there a blue pill for everything? Was it a blue pill?
Yeah. That was true in Russia, but that was also true in Greece as well. And
no matter what was wrong with you, cold and flu symptoms, broken leg, stomachache, take this blue pill.
Yep. We don't know what's in it, but that doesn't matter. All right, I'm going to promote one of our audience to panelist level. Scott Molesky, you're gonna ask us a question. Ask Andrew a question. Scott, welcome. Scott, we're going to need you to unmute yourself, if you could.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes. What's on your mind? Welcome to Basketball Love Line. What would you like to ask Andrew about?
Thank you so much. It's actually for both of you guys. What was the biggest challenge you guys faced in basketball, but besides injuries, like culturally or like opponents? Like, what was your biggest challenge that you guys faced? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Well, I'm gonna put you back to attendee, but I appreciate the question. Andrew, what would you say? What was the biggest challenge in your basketball career?
Oh, I mean, he's kind of killed me because it was bouncing back from career two career-ending injuries potentially. That was my biggest challenge. But if it was outside of injuries, it was probably just towards the end of my career of changing teams and trying to reestablish yourself in a new role or a new offensive set or with a new coach. That was a pretty big challenge.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned having to join new teams. There's the obvious big challenge of like being good enough. That's a real challenge. But I would echo what you said about having to learn how to fit into a new culture. I had to do that a bunch because I played for 17 different teams, which is crazy. And one of the things that always filled me with a lot of anxiety about going to a new team wasn't necessarily, am I going to be good enough as a basketball player? It was, can I knit myself into the fabric of this team quickly enough to be effective where I don't screw up whatever's happening there? Because I think people just sometimes maybe don't quite realize like how fragile the ecosystem of a team can be. And you don't want to come in and just like wreck that because you aren't reading the situation or the teammates or whatever the spot is,
Yeah, no doubt. And sometimes, better off sitting in, not making any noise. I've seen it both ways. As guys come to locker rooms that are obnoxious and loud, and that sometimes it can work for you, but it can also hinder you, and vice versa. Sometimes if you're too quiet, don't say much. It's like, does he care? Does he want to be here? So it's a mix, and I think just reading the room is probably important. You get to the situation, whether it's an NBA locker room or a new office or whatever it is just reading the room and figuring out, all right, who are the guys or the people, men and women that I can joke with, who can't I? Like, this guy likes to talk, this guy doesn't, this girl likes to do this. So I think figuring all that out on the fly is hugely important for team culture and business culture.
Yeah, and piggybacking on that, and not to go back again to us sounding like old men, but I think that's one of the most beautiful things about playing team sports is how much it teaches you about just interpersonal relationships, because it's happening when your blood pressure is high, when you're under some sort of adversity, which is really when you find out about people, right? Like, it's really easy to get along when things are going great. It's when things are going poorly that you learn how to like manage other humans and that those interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, and then industry always factored that in with millions of people being able to assess you online on social media, fans booing you, you're not playing well, you're not living up to your contract, so you factor in all those pressures that most people might face in an office, and then you might have a deadline, and then you factor that in with being in the public eye. It adds a whole another layer of nervousness to you.
Yeah. Let's take one last question. This comes from Ryan, and I like it not just for sports, but also for, I think, humans. He wonders, what things did you find held back other players from developing? And again, I think we could kind of apply that more broadly to humanity. But for now, when it comes to like people or athletes developing, what do you think most held them back?
I think for professional athletes, I saw struggle most. There was obviously a minority that didn't. The ones that I saw struggle most were the ones that would demand all throughout their junior career. So they were the guy from 11 years old. Now, you've got a LeBron who's just a freak. You know, like I said, there's a minority that have just hit out of the park at every level. But the guys I saw struggle most transitioning to the NBA are those guys, because there might be a time where they have to play a role on a team and be the second, third, fourth wheel. You go to Golden State, you got Steph to play there, and you're a pretty good scorer or whatever, and you're not going to be the number one option. But then guys, struggle with that adjustment. Like, oh, get me out of here. I can't. Coaching's hating on me, or I can do more for the team. It's like, yeah, we know, but we don't need you to do that. We have two other guys that are doing that already at an elite level. So I think it's a curse almost for young kids to be the best at 11, 12, 13 years old. I'd much rather my children and the journey that I've taken, and speaking to many other athletes, they're all generally the guys that make it have a similar story throughout their high school days.
Okay, before we wrap up, I wonder this. Let's say hypothetically that there's a person listening or watching who wants to make some sort of change in their lives. What's the one small thing you would have them do to their habits or routines to help in making that change?
Wow. I mean, there's a number for me, but getting up for something every morning. So
yeah,
whether it's you go for a walk, whether it's you had your coffee, you read something, and then you get out of the door and do whatever it is, getting up for something is very, very important now. Most people work 9 to 5, right? So I would highly encourage people to, if you're working 9 to 5 and you leave the house at 8 to get to work, get up at 7. Maybe take a walk around the block at 15. Maybe just get some me time in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I try to wake up and give the kids for about 5 or 10 minutes straight away. Talk to the wife, make sure they slept okay, all that kind of stuff, and then go upstairs, get a coffee, and usually just read what's going on in the world a little bit, 10 to 15 minutes, and then you go on my day.
I like it. I wholeheartedly agree and feel like it was something that I personally learned too late in life. Andrew, thanks for hanging out. And
just quickly on the flip side of that, there's another side of that. I would put the phone down. I started doing this probably about 3 or 4 months ago. I put the phone down about an hour before bed. Watching TV fine, reading the books fine, kind of unwind. But I put the phone down as far as reading what's going on in the world and all that kind of stuff an hour before bed.
Yeah. Or take control of the phone. Don't let the phone control you, right? Like, set up boundaries.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of that. I can tell you, like, I'm on it way too much. And I know that, and I'm cognizant of it. Being cognizant of it is the first step, they say, as part of any rehab. But yeah, that's a change I made a little while ago. Was like, notice, sitting in bed and not, wife next to you, and you're just kind of locked into something and not really paying attention. So I try to do that, and whether we watch a show together or whatever it is, I try to put it down for an hour before bed.
Into it. So it's the things you do before you go to bed. It's the things you do right after you wake up in the morning. Andrew Bogut, I appreciate getting to meet you and to pick your brain. Thanks for doing this.
No worries. Thanks anytime.
Thanks.